Turkish President Erdogan has assumed new constitutional powers after winning the general election. Can Turkey's centralized power structure help it tackle both economic and security challenges? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Turkish President Erdogan has won a second term. The Supreme Election Council says he clinched the absolute majority of the valid votes. Before our discussion about the latest election, let's take a look at this.
There was a buzz in the air across Turkey on Sunday as Turks hit the polls for presidential and parliamentary elections. Opposition supporters were especially excited as exit polls suggested CHP candidate Muharrem İnce would finish second and face Erdogan in runoff battle. However, early on Sunday evening, the state-run Anadolu news agency declared Erdogan the outright victor, surpassing 50% of the vote. An Erdogan win means Turkey will move forward with a shift to a presidential system, which will give him much more executive power. The Prime Minister's office will be abolished, and Erdogan will have the right to appoint ministers and judges.
From
now on, it's time for the President and the Parliament to do more work. Now it is time to leave behind the arguments, conflicts, and resentments of election time and focus on the future of our country.
Sunday's parliamentary elections also carry significance. According to state media results, the Kurdish HDP has passed the 10% threshold needed to get representation in the Turkish parliament. This means the AK Party and MHP Nationalist Movement Party would not have enough seats on their own to make constitutional amendments. With the elections over and no runoff to campaign for, the Turkish government and its newly re-elected president will likely need to focus on the country's troubled economy and the tumbling Turkish lira, one of the key issues driving voters at the ballot box.
For discussion on the Turkish general election, we are joined in Ankara by Selçuk Kalaoglu, who is a director of the Turkish Center for Asia-Pacific Studies and professor of international relations. Welcome, sir. In Washington, D.C., the United States, we have Dr. Bülent Ali Reza, Director and Senior Associate of the Turkey Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. May I start with you, Dr. Ali Reza? Are you surprised by the result?
No, not at all. President Erdogan, previously as Prime Minister and now as President, has developed a knack for winning elections. He has a magic formula. There were doubts as to whether the economic downturn would affect the vote. There's some evidence that it did so, but nonetheless, he was able to eke out a victory with 50% of the vote. And now, as your report said, the challenge is the economy.
It's the economy, but does the economy matter that much to him? Because he's already, once again, in the office, and with absolute almost the power.
You know, the constitutional changes that were approved in the referendum last April now formally come into force, but President Erdogan had been wielding de facto power even before. You know, Turkey was a parliamentary democracy, but it was all quite clear from the time that Erdogan became president in 2014 that real power was vested in him. The Prime Minister and the government were responsive to his desires and instructions. So, I mean, nothing has really changed. We moved from de facto to de jure.
Yeah.
Yes, he's won the elections, but you know, the economic situation is not good. The stock market went up. but it went back down. The Turkish lira strengthened a bit, but it went back down. And it's the international financial conditions that he now has to deal with.
Yeah. But the question is, how is he going to deal with it? I mean, after the election, will still he make enormous amount of efforts? Even that means political capital he has to put in. Professor Kalaoglu.
Yeah, actually the economy will be the first agenda of President Erdogan in the new term, and also with very strong executive power. So there is no excuse for there will be no excuse for Erdogan for future economic political success or unsuccessful some back wars. So I think President Erdogan needs to reassure the international investors to invest in Turkey more for as foreign direct investment or to invest in stock exchange or financial system. And also President Erdogan needs to reassure domestic investors, Turkish investors too. And also it depends on the lifting the state of emergency, because Turkish citizens feel not secure enough against the current system under the state of emergency. So during the election campaign, as well as opposition candidates, President Erdogan himself also offered to leave state of emergency just after the elections.
So how is he likely to map out the overall plan? I mean, on the one hand, economic development, that is supposed to be on the agenda, at least that's what he has been committing to for the election. And then there's also the so-called partnerships that Turkey has been vigorously trying to establish in the region, and kinds of muscles Turkey tried to demonstrate to the region as well. And there's also the sensitive relations that Turkey could have with some countries in the region, for example, Syria and others. Meanwhile, there is also the internal political situation, as you mentioned, with the emergency situation earlier that was put out into a order. So how is he likely to map out these different sectors and woven them into an implementable plan? Dr. Ali Reza, your thought?
Well, listing all of those issues that he has to grapple with, you almost wonder whether he was lucky to win the elections. But joking apart, he will have a difficult task ahead of him, trying to deal with the economy and deal with all the international issues that are on Turkey's agenda. Now, Turkey is cooperating with Russia and to some extent with Iran in Syria. There are Turkish soldiers in Syria, Turkish forces in Iraq moving towards, to some extent, the PKK camps in Kandil. It has a difficult relationship, the country has a difficult relationship with the European Union, difficult relationship with its main ally, the United States. And, you know, I do not see, I'm talking to you from Washington, I do not see the major issues between Washington and Ankara being eradicated in the near future. And, you know, we keep on going back to the economy. There were populist measures before the elections that helped ensure the victory for him. Now, in order to satisfy the international investors, he has to actually tighten up the economy. And whether he can do that without losing his political capital while he deals with these international issues will be what all of us will be analyzing.
Right. Dr. Ali Reza has really put out a very tricky map for the current president in Turkey. Professor Kalaoglu, where do you think is the starting point, the very start of the string that in a way could help to provide some solutions? Where is that magical starting point?
Well, actually, toning down of Erdogan, particularly in domestic politics, getting more conciliatory mood, covering all people, polarized people during the election campaigns and last several years. So this should be first step. The second one, these more unified stance within the domestic politics will help Erdogan to get more respect and credibility for international investors to invest in Turkey more, because without, I can say, peaceful and very stable atmosphere in the country, the international investors are hesitant to invest in those countries. In that manner, so the rule of law and the guarantee of rule of law and independence of the particularly economic autonomous institutions like watchdogs and including the particularly central bank is very critical in that sense. So President Erdogan needs to assure international creditors and international leaders to invest in Turkey and also to raise a image. Turkey is a credible and cooperative partner in every sense, politically and economically. I think this will be the first task for Erdogan to assure everyone Turkey will be more prosperous and stable.
Right. Well, those are some of the scenes on the screen from Turkey, absolutely very vibrant. However, Dr. Ali Reza, with some of the partnerships really put into question, as you mentioned, several sensitive buttons, at least for the so-called West, for example, Russia, Syria, Iraq, not necessarily good relation with the United States, problematic with the EU from time to time. Why would the creditors, particularly those from the West, believe in President Erdogan's talk about Turkey being the place to invest your money?
Well, you know, it's interesting to note that when he went to London, where he met the Queen and Prime Minister May, he talked to the investors, and his comments to investors helped provoke a run on the lira, because he brought into question the central bank independence. Now, given the fact that the money that flows into Turkey, which is so important for the development projects that Mr. Erdogan was boasting about in the election campaign to his supporters, come from the West, and London is a major center for the funds that Turkey is seeking. It is those kind of comments raise doubts as to whether an Erdogan victory will be good for Turkey and from the point of view of the investors. And given the fact that the Turkish lira, as I said at the outset, after having recovered, has gone back down, is an indication that the investors have doubts as to whether the new 5-year term that President Erdogan, who was previously seen as a major factor of stability, is good for Turkey. And until the international investors have the satisfaction that they need to continue to invest in Turkey from Mr. Erdogan and his new team, I think the question marks over the Turkish economy will continue.
Professor Kalaoglu, the thing is that we cannot just focus on one country, right? We have to look at the bigger picture. The world is changing very fast. If you look at the earlier debate about China-US trade, the China-EU relationship, and then there's the issue of international trading system. There's the issue of what is going to be the bottom line and the standards that countries would hold on to in terms of their trade relations and interactions. Professor Kalaoglu, where does Turkey stand here? Will Turkey offer some kinds of comfort to investors about these issues?
Actually, until now, Turkey, as a part of the EU's customs union, Turkey is following the similar line together with the EU countries. So Turkey's policy until now is very similar for that. During the election campaigns, the politicians cannot focus on these possible trade wars between the great economies around the world. But Turkey's stance is very similar to the EU stance because of the economic closeness and deeper economic integration with the EU countries. In that manner, also if the EU puts some extra taxes and tariffs to the United States and other countries, also Turkey follows the similar line. Turkey's current position and possibly the President Erdogan's position will be the more pro-globalist and integrationist line, particularly cooperating with all major economic and political powers In that manner, for example, Turkey is very eager to integrate its middle corridor for Central Asia together with Chinese Belt Road Initiative. So in that sense, Turkey has a more liberal stance for international trade liberalization together with the EU countries.
Dr. Ali Reza, you see the regionalization, it is vibrantly taking place despite some of the setbacks, let's just say, in North America. But in the Middle East, for example, there are a lot of things going on. In the developing and emerging economies, there are also a lot of ideas and initiatives going on. For example, Belt and Road, those that raised by China, the Eurasian corridor, community, economic community by Russia. So where do you think Turkey could, in a way, fit itself into all of these different ideas and get the best out of it for itself?
What a great question. You know, we're now talking about geopolitics at the macro level. Turkey's been part of the Western Alliance since it joined NATO during the Cold War with U.S. help, and then developed a very strong relationship with its main partner and ally, the United States. Now that relationship is frayed. Not only have there been problems with the administration, but the U.S. Congress has now got involved, and they're threatening to prevent Turkey from acquiring the F-35s, which is going to be, which was planned to be the next generation fighter for Turkey. So while the relationship with the U.S. is going down, Turkey's trying to cooperate with Russia, even though they were on opposite sides of the Syrian civil war, and of course with the third center of power, China. Turkey's been trying to develop a relationship. Is very much involved in the BRI, but I would argue that in the immediate future, it's a relationship with the EU that really matters. The majority of Turkish trade with the Europeans is with the Europeans. Turkey is part of the customs union, and the funds that come into Turkey come primarily from European centers. So given the fact that that relationship is also atrophied, it's very important for Ankara to somehow find a way to have a better relationship with the EU while it grapples with all the other parts of the equation.
Very challenging roadmap for Ankara, but certainly that's where the fun is as well, right? Well, for now, I want to thank both of you gentlemen for being with us and offering your insights. Selçuk Karaoglu and also Bülent Ali Reza. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.